from an operational perspective, be thinking 6-9 months ahead. If you're waiting, I don't pick on renewals, but if you're waiting until the time that renewal offer needs to go out and you haven't thought about that resident up until that point, you are behind me. I love walking properties, and I challenge everyone listening to do this. The next time you walk on a property, look up. Nobody looks at the ceiling. Nobody looks at the lights that are out. Nobody looks at the cobwebs that are in the corner, and you can find it in every single building you walk. We brought management in-house, and one of the first things I noticed when I walked the building for the first time was the public restroom in the lobby. Now understand, this building had been open for a year and a half. In the lobby restrooms, the men's room said men's, not a picture of a person in a dress. This was way before the rise of everything else, but people had walked it for overnight and just never looked. They never paid attention to a detail like that. I'm really excited about learning how AI truly can be applied. They never get tired, not meaning they'll make the next phone call. They never lose empathy. They never lose that ability to, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. When I was out as assistant community manager collecting rents, I promise you by the 28th of every month, I had lost empathy. So it is no surprise at all that we see, I think one of the biggest threats to the industry is legislation. We're seeing that right now with a little bit on the revenue management side where people are, let's do it.
We're already rolling, so hey, welcome.
Thank you, I appreciate the invitation.
You and I were talking about off camera, about something you're super passionate about, resident retention. So give us some general thoughts, and then I like to dig deeper into the issues.
Yeah, so on a general thought basis, if you look at where the industry's at right now and the market's at right now, you'd think with delivering 1 million units over the last 12 months or so that we would see resident retention kind of fall through the floor, because all these units are being absorbed in these marketplaces. There's been the demand for it. But if you look at the actual numbers, resident retention right now is at the highest it's ever been, sans the 1 quarter of COVID. UDR, Mike Lacey over at UDR in their quarterly earnings report said that in January, they were trending a sub 30 turnover ratio, which means they had a 70% retention ratio on a 60,000 unit portfolio. That blows my mind. So from a retention perspective, that's really where my head is at is, are we going to see, everyone's expecting rents to continue to stay cool through the leasing season as we absorb the rest of the stuff and then start to not jump, but start to escalate in 2026, 2027. I'm starting to wonder, are we actually going to see a slight warm up over the leasing season because so many residents are staying put versus what we would normally expect to actually leave and go to that next apartment?
We think about cycles, evolutions in retention, evolutions in turnover, but then also thinking about cycles, people who've been through these cycles, you've seen cycles come and go. What are your thoughts around, making it through this cycle? Many people thought 2025 was the year. Now we're thinking maybe 26.
It was survive till 25, then it was survive through 25.
Yeah. People think interest rates are going to go down. We're seeing interest rates go up right now. How do you think about longevity? How do you plan ahead? What is maybe some of the best advice you've ever learned from someone about going through cycles?
Wow. So the best advice I've ever gotten about going through cycles and just in life is this too shall pass. Mm-hmm. And I apply that to both the bad times where people talk about that, but also the good times. We had an entire generation of both regional managers and asset managers that when the downturn actually hit, they had never experienced a downturn. I mean, they had only known an area or an era of rising rents. So it became this mindset shift that they had to go through that they had no reference for. But if you're constantly thinking and constantly preparing of, okay, we know this is going to be we know it's a cyclical business. We absolutely know it's a cyclical business. We can see the end of this cycle coming. It's one of the, Jay Parsons, I'll pick on him a little bit. He always says, the easiest economic thing to actually predict is supply, because you just look at starts and go out 18 months and you pretty much know what the deliveries are going to be. And the gap between deliveries and starts right now, I don't know if it's ever been smaller, but it's super small right now. People aren't starting deals at this point. So as we're thinking about those cycles, it's, again, be thinking from an operational perspective, be thinking 6-9 months ahead. If you're waiting, and I'm picking on renewals, but if you're waiting until the time that renewal offer needs to go out and you haven't thought about that resident up until that point, you are behind the 8 ball. It is making it a part of your daily life cycle that is really focused in on how do I ensure that my operation is in the best possible spot it can be 6 months from now, 9 months from now.
So you mentioned uncertainty as being one of the causes for increase level in resident retention. Is there anything that operators are doing better to help with those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and just for the listener's sake, I think we talked about that off camera. But yeah, I do believe that broader economic uncertainty does lead people to be change and risk averse. So I think part of what's driving retention right now is what's going to happen in 2 months, 6 months. I mean, heck, the next 2 days with the way it's been going recently. That uncertainty is something that they can play off. But what I do think operators are doing now, and I think that we're starting to have this understanding, is we understand that the owners of real estate are in the real estate business. I think more and more operators are starting to understand and embrace that where they facilitate the real estate business, they're in the hospitality business. And they are approaching especially resident services from that perspective. And I'm not necessarily talking about being like the Waldorf Astoria down the street from where this beautiful studio you guys have is here, but being very diligent about following up on work orders, having communications. I think AI in this space from a large language model perspective is a phenomenal use of this, where I don't think AI can build community. I think it's very good at building relationship at this point. And I think that's starting to participate in. So I think the adoption of both the communication side of technology as well as the service side of technology, which I think has a lot of green space to go in it, are things that operators are doing better now than they did when I was operating properties per se.
Yeah, I think so much to your point about hospitality everywhere. What is the experience that I'm going to be left with? What is the feeling when I'm in this space? Is it a feeling of fear? Is it a feeling of excitement? Is it a feeling that I want to invite others to? Are there memories being made, to your point? That's why some of these incredible brands, people don't think about money when they're going there.
Yeah.
I think about that with rent. I mean, tell us a little more, your multifamily journey.
Sure.
And your real estate journey. Tell us a little bit more, because were you an RA or a
I
resident
was.
assistant, moved up, through the ranks?
Yeah, so I got a degree from the University of California at Santa Barbara. One I know that's close
Gauchos.
to you, both
Yep.
Gauchos, go Gauchos. Which has an incredible amount of applicability to the real estate space. My degree is aquatic biology with an emphasis in ecology and evolution.
Okay.
I was on my way to go to grad school. I was going to study the tiny little things in the ocean called the zooplankton and phytoplankton. And along the way, I did start as a resident assistant. Some people do that to, get part of their college paid for, their housing. I certainly enjoyed that. I really did it because I liked the leadership and the mentoring portion of it. And then my senior year, and I worked junior maintenance at that place. I was security. I was the front desk. I kind of did everything. But when I was going to leave for graduate school, the general manager of the dorm, it was a privately owned, privately run dorm, and there weren't a lot of those back then. He calls me up and says, Andrew, I don't have anybody to run Res Life next year. If you want it, it's yours. And it was a free room and board. It was exactly a salary that would pay exactly my first year of grad school. So I was like, great, I'm going to take what now people call a gap year. Although I was going to work through my gap year. But I was going to take that gap year, I was going to reapply, I was going to get into Scripps Institute down in San Diego, and I was going to go live the Jacques Cousteau life. In the process, I fell in love with the business side. I'd never been exposed to business before. And I looked at the business, and I still do, much like I did ecology and evolution. It's what input and what population affects what, and how if I tweak this, does it affect this outcome, and thinking that 6 to 9 months down the road. That led to a career in the multifamily side with Oakwood. I did a long stint on the corporate housing side with multiple different operators where I was running various different markets, ultimately down in Texas with Marriott. And then 2008-9 came around. There was people might remember a recession that came through at that time too. Ended up getting back on the operations side as a regional manager and asset manager, and then spent the better part of 14 years with a large SaaS company in the multifamily space in the, what people call asset optimization, but it was revenue management, business intelligence. And that was a lot of fun because I got to help bring new products to life, bring them to market, see them get adopted. And then a little under a year ago, jumped over to join old friends over at LeaseLock.
So you actually do have hospitality experience.
I do. I worked for Marriott for a bit, and it was fun to see them get into the apartment space. My first day with Marriott, though, was September 10th, 2001, so the day before 9/11. And if you've ever been to the 9/11 memorial, and if you haven't, please definitely make it a trip. Go to the museum. But the very last thing in that museum as you take the tour is you learn that there was a Marriott hotel between the two towers. That event changed Marriott fundamentally. They went from being an organization that wanted to be your housing provider from the moment you left your parents' house to the time you went to the grave. They had senior housing, they were in student housing, they had all these different arms. And that one event literally changed that company to, we want the 3 to 7 day business traveler. But I ran their corporate housing division while we were looking to franchise those divisions off. And it was really interesting to see the way that a true hospitality company was approaching long-term rental housing, long-term being 30, 60, 90 days. You know, the advent of revenue management before revenue management was a thing within the space. The ability to service a guest regardless of whether they're in our Denver office or our Boston office or our Seattle office, all with the same consistency and the same level of product was an interesting that I think a lot of groups now, especially larger owner-operators, are trying to incorporate in their organizations today.
What did you personally take from hospitality and incorporate it in your day-to-day in multifamily?
So I've always been much more hospitality bent than just property management bent. We were talking Disney earlier today. When I was a regional manager, I made all my managers read the Disney way. You know, you talked about the environment and its everyday life. I love walking properties, and I challenge everyone listening to do this. The next time you walk on a property, look up. Nobody looks at the ceiling. Nobody looks at the lights that are out. Nobody looks at the cobwebs that are in the corner. And you can find it in every single building you walk. So what I took from hospitality is everything matters. You know, that entire experience when someone walks off and says, yeah, that wasn't my favorite hotel, but they can't give you a reason specifically why. You know, it just felt dingy. It felt those types of things. It is to walk on with fresh eyes and do it as often as possible because we're on these properties every day. And it's really easy to see the same thing all the time. And I'll give you my favorite example, and I haven't thought about this in years. I was with a fully integrated shop where we brought management in-house. So we had done, when I was an asset manager with them, we were working with, at the time it was Riverstone. You guys all know the history there. We brought management in-house. And one of the first things I noticed when I walked the building for the first time was the public restroom in the lobby. Now understand, this building had been open for a year and a half. How many inspections had people done in a year and a half and walked around, including delivery and everything else? In the lobby restrooms, the men's room said men's and had a picture of a person in a dress. This was way before the rise of everything else, but people had walked it for overnight and just never looked. They'd never paid attention to a detail like that. But meanwhile, I guarantee guests had come in there and said it, because my first time was like, I think I'm supposed to use this one. I'm not really sure at this point, but it's things like that.
Lisa Trozian just posted, I saw online about a room she was in, I think, and the setup, she couldn't even use the mirror because it was too high, and so I think, to the point of like, many people aren't actually living and breathing and staying in these things. You think about like Airbnb, Brian Chesky, right?
Yeah.
He lives it. He travels it every single day, staying with people. And to your point is how many people are actually using it? How many people are actually going and staying in their apartments? Something I noticed with like Bizzuto. They have a suite. So we're going to DC next week.
Yeah.
And what's great is we have Advocate, and we have a lot of owners and managers, for those who don't know, who head to DC every year to advocate for the industry. Whether it's NAA,
Can't wait to do it.
NMHC, RETC. And one of the core things is like, Bizzuto, the powerhouse they've created a suite for guests, not only guests of the people who live there, but also the corporate team to stay when they're traveling. I think it's one of the smartest things because then you get to experience what life is like as opposed to staying at a hotel or staying off-site.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I had a recent experience where we were in between homes. We sold our home of 20 plus years in June of 2021, and our new home wasn't ready to actually be moved into until December of 2021. So I had a 6-month time frame where I intentionally chose to go live at a BTR that was around the corner. Know the management company really well, know the owners really well, and they'd take my 2 dogs in the backyard. The BTR concept's fantastic. It reminded me so much of all the things I had forgotten about the resident experience from a resident perspective that I think it would be indelibly valuable. I don't know how you do it, but if you were in the space, if you could go spend 3 months as a renter, not just going to the suite, but 3 months feeling the entire renter experience. I told this in another podcast earlier today, actually, but for my apartment, in a non-gated community. Want to take a stab at how many apps I needed as a resident? I had 5 apps.
5, okay.
5, because payment was one, work orders was a completely different one, the smart home technology was a completely different one, there was the internet that was a completely different one, and then in all fairness, I didn't download the 5th one because I'm Gen X, so I could push the remote buttons on my garage, but I had another one for the garage as well. But that's the experience our residents have. Like it's this disjointed, how do we bring this together in a meaningful way to improve that resident experience, and full circle, bring that back to how do we get people to want to stay longer. Yeah.
Branding, obviously you travel, we all here travel quite a bit. What's the traveler experience compared to resident experience in multifamily? And I'm gonna narrow it down to branding, right? Yeah. You have, I'm sure you have a preferred brand of hotels that you want to stay at.
Absolutely.
Whether that's Hilton or Marriott, they try to get you hooked to their, programs. You also, I'm sure you have an airline that's favorite. What management company, if any, does a decent job in the multifamily space to kind of copy those successful programs? Because loyalty programs are like millions and millions of making the returning customers what everybody's fighting for.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, Adrian, and it's actually one of the things. So I decided this year was the first year I'd done it, but I'm going to make it an annual thing. I wrote an article that had like 5 bold predictions for 2025. And one of those predictions is that the company brand is going to outweigh the asset brand finally in multifamily. But to answer your specific question of who's doing it well, I don't know that any are necessarily doing it well from a rewards standpoint, but from a branding standpoint, I think Cortland, we're actually here in Atlanta, I didn't plan this, but I think Cortland is actually doing a pretty good job. And the reason I would say that is there was a period in time where, like, I work out most mornings, I throw a podcast on, but I like to watch the podcast and something than just listen, so it's on YouTube for me. There was a period of time for the better part of probably 12 months where the algorithm had picked up on me based on what I was listening on, that I would get a Cortland ad in my feed every podcast. I'm not talking about a Cortland community. I'm talking about Cortland. So there was a talking pug who would come on and tell me all about the Cortland communities and why I should stay at a Cortland community and all those types of things, but it had nothing to do with Cortland Midtown or had nothing to do with Cortland Richardson or those types of things. It was Cortland. I think from that perspective, I think they're probably leading the way right now. Camden does a great job with it as well. Every property is branded a Camden Riverwalk or a Camden whatever. But beyond that, it is to your point, it's the experience. Why do people stick with Marriott? I'm a Marriott guy. Shouldn't surprise you at all. I stick with it for 2 reasons. Number one, yes, I want my points and I want the rewards that come with those points. But if the rewards were coming at a facility that was garbage, I wouldn't value them at all. It's that consistency of brand and that consistency of product. And I pointed that out in the white paper that article that I did was, if you look at the 3 largest hotel chains in the world, and I'm going to blank, I know it's Marriott, Choice Hotels, and I can't remember the third one at the time.
IHG or Hilton?
I think it's IHG. I think you're right.
They're local as well.
Yeah. Marriott is the lowest franchisee percentage at almost 70%. 70% of the Marriotts you stay in, regardless of Marriott brand, is not owned by Marriott, which means they do not actually control the product. Choice and ISG, 96, 97, 98%. So I think that is a great example of how you can set a brand standard even though you don't necessarily control the physical product on the back end, which I know is what a lot of third-party managers think. Is like, well, it's the owner at the end of the day. Can I really implement a brand strategy across that? And I think the hotels prove you can.
It's pretty mind-blowing how again, I think we're in a time of change right now, but how many people have not owned that experience? To your point, some people are doing a good job. I think you're going to see more and more finally embracing technology this year. Does it work in affordable housing? Are you seeing people doing that? And number 2, there's obviously, some people are saying there's too much new stuff coming to the market, not enough affordable. So how do we get affordable to pencil out? Do you think we're having oversupply? Because you said we're probably going to have a massive undersupply on the number of builds. What about right now? What are you seeing?
Okay, so I will steal an analogy from Greg Willett that I hear him do. So I think it does it really well. It's if you compare the supply to the weather, housing in general is in a severe drought. depending on, and this, I love this aspect of it because we can't come together in the middle of this, but the projections on how far behind we are on supply is somewhere between 1 million and 7 million units, depending on who you ask. That's a giant margin of error, but let's settle in the middle and just say 3. So we're 3 million units behind. Even in a severe drought, if you get a severe storm that comes through, you can still have localized flooding. That's what we're experiencing right now from a supply side. So yes, we're in the severe storm where we're experiencing the localized flooding. There's a short-term supply glut in certain areas that is being absorbed. But overall, we are still in drought conditions. It's coming fast, it's coming furious, and to keep killing the analogy, it's not having the time to actually soak into the ground and really, build the moisture level that we actually need. Now to your point of affordable housing, something has to change from a administration level for affordable little a to truly start penciling out. The reason we see all these, Class A buildings constantly being delivered is because they're the only things that actually pencil out from a new delivery, unless you're getting tax incentives and tax abatements and those types of things. And we see some of those deals, especially in areas like Dallas and other, and Texas in general. Yeah, well, that's what's going to go. I'm actually super excited for what I believe Scott Turner will be able to deliver. He was a champion of opportunity zones, and we would not have had those without him in the last Trump administration. Him being the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development gives me hope that we're going to see much more focus on that. And Carl Whitaker and the team over at RealPage did some really good analysis on what was the impact of opportunity zones from a living perspective. And it clearly showed that the returns from an apartment perspective were very, very solid in opportunity zones. I'd also tap into, there's a proposal out there right now, or at least it's being floated out. Our thought is, well, can we use, federal lands to be able to develop more housing? And the Wall Street Journal did a good article, very recently on evaluating, okay, of all the federal land, how much could really affect it? Because I don't know about you, I'm okay with not having mid-rise mixed-use apartments on the Capitol lawn, because that's federal land. I'm okay with that. But 7% of all federal land is currently in markets that are actually housing impacted. They need the supply. It's not the middle of Montana where there's a whole bunch of land out there. And I love the conservancy and the public land opportunity in the United States. I don't want to lose it. But can we be looking at some of these buildings that are could be converted into residential as we start to look at where leases should be and shouldn't be, et cetera? But I think that's the answer. We've got to be able to make the administrative burden of being able to bring new properties to bear much less. Now, unfortunately, that's a local level, which means you're dealing with NIMBYism, you're dealing with all those types of things. But that's got to be where this problem is ultimately solved to get little a affordable back on track.
I think about your analogy is not only do we have the fires that just happened in Southern California, and the fires that happen every year. I used to live in California, and just nonstop, and you have over 10,000 homes gone instantly. Not enough development, people trying to find housing. But it reminds me of Houston. The hurricane. I was in Dallas. I think it was 2018 or 2017, 2018. And I went. They were talking about how Houston was overbuilt by 40,000 apartment buildings, gone overnight with the hurricane. I think they were in deficit of about 30,000 because everyone had to move out. So just like that, you can lose housing, but you can't just rebuild it overnight. After a storm or after a hurricane or whatever, tragedy.
Well, and I hate to say this, but looking at Southern California, 'cause again, I was down there too. I mean, I remember growing up, just east of the Altadena fire that was out there. And it was almost an annual occurrence that my dad and I were on the roof hosing it down. And that was from controlled burns and everything else, which they stopped doing. But you think about those 10,000 homes lost, what's going to go replace it at this point? Because not every home is going to be rebuilt on that, at least not by the current owners. It's an incredible opportunity to think about is there an opportunity to rethink how we're providing housing in that area? But LA is also an example of a marketplace where the politics is actually legitimately now preventing institutional money from actually investing with any type of conviction in that space. At least LA County. They'll still go to Orange County and some of the other areas, but LA County is almost redlined at this point.
I have the feeling that a lot of times we make this conversation too complicated. To me, it could be kept down to two simple aspects. One would be supply and demand. Build more, the price will go down. We see this in the markets that I think their label is overbuilt, being overbuilt, which, Jay Parsons disagrees. He thinks that it's just a temporary situation. And he's right. Everybody builds. There's too much supply. Everybody stops. And then you're going to have a shortage. Down the road, you fill it up, and then you're going to have a shortage. And the second aspect is, how do we make governments, local, federal, to stay out of the way, to stay out of business? We're looking in some areas 40 plus cents per dollar as being cost of a new construction, being just regulation. So I will think if we just reduce that and we make the regulations down to like 30 or 20 cents per dollar, that will be a huge thing. Just how do we make the government stay out of the way and encourage people to actually develop more? Because I think that's what really holds us back from having affordable housing. We don't have enough supply because there's so much regulation. It's very expensive to build, and the case of California, it's like incredibly, almost like they make it impossible for you to build.
So, there's a lot in there to unpack, Adrian. I love that you asked it.
Sure.
First and foremost, I'd say, that price point coming down from a supply and demand, that absolutely applies to rent for sure. Where it doesn't necessarily apply is the cost to deliver a building to begin with, which is where you went second. I think the not so simple answer as to how do we combat that 48% of administrative costs? It's advocacy on the local level. It is mobilizing this. You mentioned we're going to NAA advocate here next week relative to the timing of the podcast. That's great that we're doing it on a national level. I throw myself under this bus first and foremost of not being as involved as I should have been in this. But the reality is the vast majority of the cost you're referring to there is on the local, state, and county levels. It's more of our community getting involved within these discussions. It is being the person at the town council meeting that is in favor of the multifamily development. It is the person who is advocating on behalf of the industry. If you look at what the industry spends on advocacy across the nation relative to what tenants groups spend advocacy, it's like 100x what tenant groups spend versus us. So it is no surprise at all that we see, I think one of the biggest threats to the industry is legislation. We're seeing that right now with a little bit with on the revenue management side where people are, passing city laws where, okay, you can no longer do, algorithmic pricing that's based on non-public data that's in play. We see it on the deposit alternative side. We see it on the fee-based side. There are, deposit side is it. Overall, the industry is kind of under attack a little bit. But I think we've taken the approach of sitting back and taking a national approach. We need more activity on the local apartment association level, the local trade level to help educate, not fight, but educate as to, okay, here's the actual impact from an economic perspective. Having another 600 residents in your city is actually going to make with the small businesses that you're trying to attract. You say you want I'll pick on my own town. My town has a serious, and I won't use names, but my town has a serious case of jealousy of another town just across the lake. We desperately want to be them, but we don't enact the policies that will attract the resident base, that would attract the businesses that they attract. We do exactly the opposite. We're very exclusionary. We're the only, there are only 2 Home Depots in the entire United States that do not have the burnt orange Home Depot sign. One is in Bryant College Station, Texas A&M, because they're never allowing burnt orange in Texas A&M. The other one is in my town because they wouldn't allow it because it didn't fit the color scheme at that point. It is legislation like that on the local level that ends up resulting in these extra fees. I mentioned we built a house a couple of years ago. We failed an inspection because the porta potty for the house across the street was on the wrong side of the sidewalk.
Wow.
So that ends up having another inspection that has to get paid. It's things like that that are just absolutely ridiculous. Nothing to do with my house, but they failed it because of that, and it ended up being another $150, $200 for another inspection. So
well, it's interesting because as you talk about the locality and things being up to a permitting team or an architecture design team, et cetera, in each city, local, county, state, and then working its way up to the federal. I think one of the interesting things about Atlanta, right, and Dallas, I think there's a lot to learn from Texas. Not only Atlanta and Dallas.
Good and bad.
Yeah, but exactly. And it is so localized of NIMBYism and YIMBYism at the same time. But there's definitely an opportunity, I think, to your point. So how do we educate the local teams? Yeah. But also from a technology standpoint, because technology can help hopefully avoid some of those things, but also help the people not approving it, requiring extra inspection to say, hey, they just made a small, we don't need to wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for an inspection. You need to adjust it by a half inch, or hey, we can do this remotely. Someone reviews it or says, hey, it's close enough. It's within the margin of error. Why are we delaying these houses? Why are we delaying cost having holdups? But I think, definitely on a technology side, what is the opportunity on a national level from, if we talk about technology, right? For housing, for the industry, how would you think about that? Because I think you obviously see a lot of technology. You've had a lot of history with technology, but how can we make technology that force for good in the industry?
Well, I love that you said the force for good, like that, and because that is really what it is designed to do. So I think that anything we do that legitimately enhances the overall living experience for residents is a positive. I'll put rent reporting as a recent one that's in play there. I think that is a phenomenal thing that the industry has widely adopted to be able to, enhance the lives long-term from a financial perspective of our resident base. I think programs like Built, we mentioned rewards earlier. I think that is another one that's designed to do good for the residents. I'll give a somewhat shameless plug. From a lease lock perspective, one of the things we're really focusing on doing is, okay, how do we participate in making rental housing more accessible? Well, we're doing that by removing the burden of the deposit on the resident by working with the owners to produce a certificate of insurance that covers that instead. Because the challenge is now a resident. The average American, 57% of Americans, according to Bankrate, have less than $1,000 to pay for an emergency. Think about that. 57% have less than $1,000. They don't have a 1-month deposit in that regard. So when we think about their ability to actually move, go to the housing they need, that's one of the ways that we're focused in on it from a technology perspective. I think there's a lot more we can do, though, especially on the affordable front that you asked about earlier. There are a lot of good programs out there that could be combining after-school programs with, the rent reporting, with the TIC process and true affordability, to actually be able to track what type of impact, especially from a financial perspective, their housing is having on their overall financial well-being. You can't do it in conventional because we don't re-screen, and I'm not thinking we should rescreen every year, but in the affordable space, you've got to requalify every year. So, and I know groups that are doing this. They're taking that data now and they're tracking, okay, my resident base on average had one checking account and half a savings account with $500 balance last year. This year, we now see that they have on average 1.5 checking account and 3/4 of his savings account, meaning more people have savings accounts. And we're now seeing the average balance is up to $750, $500, $1,000. But they've done that intentionally through, I'm going to call this technology. I'm not sure it's where you really wanted me to go, but it's the technology of bringing the right group in, promoting it the right way, making sure the residents are participating in it, and furthering the lives that they can down the road. And this is a wonderful example of how we can work with both public, private, and really build up the lives of our resident base.
From an operator perspective, they're looking at a lot of technology that's being assaulted. A lot of large operators, when you actually open their tech stack, looks like the Apple Store. And I'm not kidding you. Like, if you put them side by side, you don't know which is which. This makes their operators, site level especially, drowning in technology. How can one navigate through these challenges? What are some great ways for an operator to look at technology, vet technology, and say, this is actually something we need? It's not like a nice to have or bells and whistles. And then how they actually look at their current stack and actually say, this is something that we don't need. We just have to stick to 5 or 10 basic pieces of technology.
You were going to get me in such trouble with the vendor side of our business with the answers I'm about to give you, Adrian. So thank you for doing that to me.
I think that they need to hear it, and here's why. Yesterday and today I had 2 conversations about technology, and I'm going to detail. The one from yesterday, they're having an idea. They're building something on the back of ChatGPT, and they're looking for clients. So I asked the question, how do you incentivize the end user to give you the information? Well, our pitch is that we go to them and we tell them, if they'll help us build a product, we're gonna give them a great rate. So I said, let me understand this correctly. You're basically telling me I had to provide free feedback for you, and you're gonna sell me the product that you build with my free feedback at a great rate. Is that your sales pitch? And I think they had a lot to think about after the conversation.
Well, I think that the approach that you just took and what you just described there, I think is the approach a lot of people in this space come through. It is one of those catch-22s in the space of, if we depend on everything being a single stack with some of the larger providers who can handle it, where's the innovation going to come from? Versus, okay, well, we have this highly diversified stack of all these very small providers, but we feel like we're getting more innovation in that type of space. The innovation should start with what are the problems the operators and owners are actually experiencing, and how do we solve for those? And I don't think we necessarily do that. Like we were recently at RetCon, I had a group that came up, really bright folks, just graduated from MIT, were solving a problem that didn't exist, or at least wasn't important. I mean, I hate to say it, they wanted to put in robots that would fold residents' laundry, and they thought they'd have a robot in every apartment. And I'm like, that's never going to happen. But again, there are much bigger, and I told them this, there are much bigger problems you could solve with that same technology. What if you retrofitted all of those robots and you deployed 10 of them on property and they were doing your trash pickup on a daily basis? It's things like that we think of. Okay, what are those challenges? What if those robots were actually also with smart technology in the building, making that last mile of package delivery happen for you, and that way you know exactly where every package went, you know exactly how it was delivered because you know the mechanism. It's all recorded, can be on camera, all the different things that are in play. That's the way I think that the industry, especially on the vendor side, has got to start thinking. If you don't have a trusted advisor in the business that is not necessarily just saying, hey, help me, that's not saying I want you to help me solve the problem I think you need to solve for, solving the problem that they need solved for. I had great conversations with two different either CEO or COOs of large organizations at RetCon, and they have a very different approach. One is very much, if you want to work with us, this is the way. This is the package we deal with. This is what we work. This is how our business operates. This is how we are the most efficient. And I guarantee they've sacrificed unit count for it. The other one was, we'll do what you want. And the one who's we'll do what you want was literally like, I wish we were this. I wish we were this is the way. But from the vendor side, you've got to have that really hard conversation and thought with yourself of, are we solving a problem that actually matters to the industry? The operator side of the equation, and I'll use Darren Williams over at Portico as an example of this. Every year they set 3 very intentional strategic implementations for the year. And unless something like COVID happens, those are the 3. Period, end of story. So they're not going to go to every bell and whistle. They're not going to we're going to try these 3 sites to try this out. We're not going to do this one, this way. And he put it a really good way for me. We're talking about something else. He's like, look, I have to think about this from my site team's experience and not just, hey, what's their day-to-day look like, but if this property over here is doing it this way and this property over here is doing it this way, I can't have the jealousy going on of like, oh, I don't want to go to that property because they don't have, lease lock on that, and I've got to do something different. To me, that's it. As an operator, know your priorities, know what it is specifically that you're going to try and overcome, and know how you do that as an organization. There are some organizations out there that are really good at piloting new technology. And they do it routinely because they want to make sure they know what's going on in the industry. But unless that's your DNA of an organization, you probably need to behave more like the Porticos of, these are our strategic opportunities. We're going to stick with those. We'll use this year to experience all the demos and have all the conversations and everything else so that we know next year we're ready to do these next 3. And we've already vetted out the people that we think would solve those issues for us. Now it's the point of figuring out which one's the right one for us.
Give them a shout out. Those that are doing it right. I like for our audience to hear.
Okay.
Who are those players?
So the one I specifically referenced that was that we have our way, and is BH management. BH management very much has the BH way. They've dedicated a team to candidly develop a lot of it themselves, especially on the business intelligence side of the equation, et cetera. I've got a ton of respect for Brandy Daniel, their chief data officer, and Joanna Zabriskie, their president. I think they do it really well. The other one I was talking to that kind of takes the other approach, but does it well as well, is the ZRS team. ZRS for the most part has the stack that they know that they want, but they have the engine within their organization to be able to investigate and say, I don't want to call it an incubator, but almost incubate, will this technology work within our technology stack, and will it serve the needs of, both our resident base and our ownership interests, since they do both third party and obviously manage for Zom.
Interesting. Yeah, I think so much about what you talked about with is it a nice to have versus a must have? Many people don't also, difference of culture, like in our early days of packages, people said it wasn't a need to have just yet. It was nice to have because they were only getting 5 or 10 packages at some properties while others were getting 40 or 50.
Right.
And eventually that turned into 100, 200, 300 a day. And so that completely changed the industry. But it was wild to see the people who came to us and said, we want you to build like this, or we want to, so Amley was one of those people who were. Go ahead, yeah.
So let me ask in that, since you lived that world, how much of the success that you had in that industry from a ramp up perspective was your ability to see and paint the future for people? That, yeah, sure, you're getting 5 a day now. I want you to imagine when Amazon becomes what Amazon is, and forget COVID. Let's exclude that for a little bit.
COVID,
yeah. How much of the success was painting that for those visionaries, and did they buy in?
So a few things. Number one, you were always having to do that because, especially even today, one of the unique things of getting to see all these technologies and see all these different teams is no two people operate the same. They can operate similarly, but you can talk to two different people who believe one thing is the answer and one thing is the devil. They will say, no, that will never work. And the other person's like, this is the greatest thing ever. So it's wild in implementation styles is something we noticed. So people who did not like package lockers and loved offsite warehouses, to people who loved package rooms or loved lockers, or some people who even said, I want to do both. So it was so different from org to org to org. And it was oftentimes an emotional decision, oftentimes more than an objective decision. And so, some people knew that Amazon was the future. We did. We grew with Amazon's growth. And so we went from 1 system a month to 10 systems a month to 200 systems a month.
Wow.
Now to, I think it's 12,000 properties, right? And that's just one company. There's multiple companies out there, multiple organizations.
Including Amazon.
Oh, of course. But what's crazy is that even on the implementation side, you're seeing wild things of the corporations and the vendors who supply, and how they, even in your space, right, they supply it in different ways. So you're right in that everyone's got a different viewpoint of how to solve. And I think there's also, some people want to wave a magic wand to say it's perfect. There's no such thing as perfection, because the minute you create something, there's a new innovation that comes along. Every time you solve a problem, there's a challenge that comes up. I think having mentors, like for us, it was Maria Banks and Ken Veltri and Steve Halsey back in the day, Jennifer J. Stack at Western Wealth. So we had Pizzuto, who took a bet on us. So Stephanie, Julie, and Toby took a bet on Pizzuto on our new product. So that was a thing, is also innovating and finding key partnerships. And then my whole thing is winning with others. So that's why I love working with Adrian, is telling these stories. So, I think that's the hard part of innovation, but I'd love to get your thoughts too. As you just called out some people who are doing a great job around innovation. Who are some people, you have the podcast Unscripted, right?
I do.
Yep.
Thanks for the shout out.
Yeah. And so if we think about it from a podcast, from, you have your time of obviously driving business, developing others, but then developing yourself. And if we think about the people who've made an impact on you, and maybe you also mentor and make an impact on others, but are there some people out there who made a significant impact on you? Like for me, I got to meet up with one of two great people last week, Dr. Debbie Phillips, and then obviously it's like Cindy Clare are two good examples of people who made an impact on my life many moons ago. But for you, are there certain people who've made an impact on you, and maybe share a little bit about the impact they made?
There's definitely quite a few, and I got to figure out who to give the right ones to.
Sure. We can add more as we go through too. So.
Well, there's several. So I would shout out first and foremost Dave Brackett, who's now at Millhouse. He's president of Millhouse. He was my first regional manager when I was a property manager in Seattle. He he taught me two things that I've absolutely taken with me. The first one was how to truly see each asset as a business entity. Now, I was a little bit fortunate in the fact that one was owned by a limited partnership. Both Howard Ruby, who owned Oakwood, as well as several other celebrities, were actually in partnership with that. So it got a lot of attention. But he taught me how to treat that as if it were the multi-million-dollar business that it actually is. And I think too often I've seen where we don't spend that time, especially with our community managers and what used to be the assistant community manager, of, hey, you're not running a property, you're running a multi-million-dollar business right now. That was a big one. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. The regional I had right after that, Ken, taught me the importance of managing and working with people where they are. He managed 5 of us as managers. He had the same expectation of all of us, but he had a very different approach with all of us that raised all of us up the way that we needed to work through. And then one I can't not shout out, at RealPage when I was working there, the person I first worked with and for was Keith Duncan. I came into RealPage, and he hates me for saying this, but I'm going to continue saying it. My job was to become Keith Jr. Like, my job was to figure out how to do that. And he taught me a really important lesson, and that lesson was the importance of confident humility. To be able to go into a room with confidence, but also be as humble as possible when you're in it. And that's different than humble confidence. Humble confidence is, you can bring that, you come in confident, but you can bring it down so it's not quite out there. It's a little more self-serving than what confident humility actually is. Those are 3 that right off the top come to mind as to taught me really important lessons. On the positive side, I can think of a couple that taught me lessons on the negative side, not from their performance, but for pointing out mistakes I was making. I'll call Gavin James out for that one. He's now the owner and president of Nomad Corporate Housing, but I was running San Francisco right before the .bomb happened, and he gave me an order to go get as much inventory as we possibly could. I knew it wasn't the right thing to do, and my heart did it anyways because I was in my late 20s, maybe early 30s, and didn't have the confidence to give him the local knowledge that he really needed to make the best decision, and we paid for it. Again, I'm not blaming him for it, I'm blaming me for that, but it was a really good lesson of seniority is one thing, but that doesn't mean they have every perspective that they need in order to make the best decision. And I withheld giving him that because I didn't think he wanted to hear it, and that was on me. So,
yeah, reminds me of Malcolm Gladwell in the some of his books. He talks
Sure.
about that, of not hearing from your team.
Yeah.
Andrew, as a fellow podcaster, what are some trends? What are some things that are important from a content creation perspective in 2025? What type of advice you have for those watching us now from a content creation standpoint? What they should be focusing on, they should be looking for in 2025?
Wow.
There's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of content creation out there. But how do you cut through the noise? And how do you actually make relevant content in 2025?
When I figure that out, I'll let you know. Like, I'm trying to figure out every day, Adrian.
Tell us about some things that work then. I'm sure that not everything is is a failure. You're learning a lot. So
yeah,
tell us about the things that you learn working.
Yeah, in the martial arts world, it's you either win or you learn. Is the way it was taught to me. I would say the most important thing, at least to me in the space, is being me. That's the one thing no one else can do. They can't bring my perspective. They can't bring my curiosity. They're going to have their own curiosity, and that's what I would say. Be curious. Like, just if you're going to be the host of something, truly be curious. Don't be afraid to do what others aren't doing. To your point, there's a lot of cookie cutter stuff out there. I think at times I've fallen into that for sure. But just be yourself. Don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. It's you're with Retcon with me. The first episode we did, I forgot to hit record on the audio. I then
You've done it too.
Yeah, then it was the first clip I put out. Also, by the way, from that group is okay. Great. I'm a dork. I made the mistakes. But if you're doing an industry podcast, kind of like yours is, like mine is, ask the questions that either the industry is asking or in my mind should be asking. Like the one I keep getting caught on, and I brought it up in I don't know how many episodes at this point, is with the implementation of standardization and centralization across different groups, organizations. The leadership model in multifamily is getting ready to break, like the development model. Because when you think about the old model, it was, be a leasing agent, shine like a star selling, get promoted to assistant community manager, survive the back office and all the accounting functions, you get promoted to community manager. Community manager, you're in the trenches long enough, you go from one property that's 150 to the next one that's 200 to the next one that's 500. Now you're ready to be a regional manager, etc. Well, in a world of specialization, the first person now who has a top-down view of all of the operations that make a property financially successful is the regional manager. Property managers aren't doing collections anymore. They're not doing renewals. They're not doing work order follow-ups. They're not doing, I know one group we talked to was wanting literally a touchless leasing to move in process. Never touching a resident between the lease to the actual time they move in. How do you take a look at a property that is either succeeding or struggling and answer the question, why and what do I do next, if you don't know all those other things? And right now, in the new model, that's the regional manager level. Well, I mentioned that 150 to 200 to 500. A lot of times that was going from Graystar to Cushwake to Willow Bridge, to finally becoming a regional manager with Cortland or what is. I don't know that a community manager who's coming from a highly centralized, specialized organization can go be a successful community manager at a non-centralized, specialized organization today. They might fight their way through it, but that's where I say it's getting ready to break. Not a lot of people want to talk about it. Everyone knows it behind the scenes, but it's kind of something we're shoving back in the corner until we have to deal with it. I don't mind talking about it. Like let's go bring it out. But I also know I'm going to take a little heat from some folks for doing it too.
What are you most excited about for this year in learning, being curious about, or something that is on your to-do list?
I am most excited about really thinking about, and everyone's going to say this is the generic answer, but it's true. I'm really excited about learning how AI truly can be applied, especially now that we start to get to agentic AI. I'll shout Sina Siku out at Aptly. He kind of opened my eyes on the bots, especially when it comes to delinquency and collections, in the fact that they never get tired, not meaning they'll make the next phone call. They never lose empathy. They never lose that ability to, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. When I was out as assistant community manager collecting rents, I promise you by the 28th of every month, I had lost empathy. They never do. That part of the business and seeing that type of application is something I'm really interested to see how it changes.
Back to content, Andrew. I understand that you learn a lot, just like we do, by trial and error. But what are some external sources that you could share? What are some folks in a space or outside of our space that actually you take after, you get inspired by, and what are some specific things that you're learning from them?
From a content perspective, and I'm thinking about the podcasts in particular, two of my favorite podcasts are Finding Mastery with Dr. Michael Gervais and the Rich Roll podcast. I consume those pretty regularly when they come on, particularly Finding Mastery. What I love about what Michael does on he's a performance sports psychologist by trade, which I'm basically repeating his intro because I've got it memorized at this point. But he is all about working with people in different walks of life, areas that have at least attempted to master their trade. You never truly get to mastery in that. Being truly curious, being able to ask questions that actually challenge the person across from him to think deeper about themselves and about their experience and what led them to be there is one of the ones that has really come in there. Another one, again, give him a direct shout out. It's not a podcast, but the chief data science officer at RealPage, Rich Hughes. I don't remember when he told me this, but at some point in my career, he said, some important questions you should always ask are what if and so what. And I think about that all the time. It's like, okay, well, what if we do replace all of the on-site leasing agents with bots. And so what will that actually occur? And I'm not saying we're doing that, but it's got through there. As far as resources, I'm a YouTube junkie. If you go down and start to look at, like, my platform of choice is LinkedIn. You know, I'm not trying to maximize Instagram. I'm not trying to do those, but LinkedIn. There are lots of great content on there that are, it's really targeted toward the solopreneur kind of mentality, but there's so many lessons you can learn if you're trying to be a thought leader, if you're trying to be, you know, a business forward facing page, et cetera, that are fantastic to learn, and truly how to engage within the LinkedIn environment. And actually, I mean, I made a mistake the other day. I'll just throw myself under this bus. When the federal use of federal lands from the Wall Street Journal came out, I made the mistake of putting Trump in my first sentence. I got down-regulated by 90%.
What was the mistake?
Putting Trump in the first sentence.
No, but why was it a mistake?
Well, because the algorithm right now, and again, this changes all the time, but the algorithm right now, especially on LinkedIn, is not looking for controversy. So putting political rants up on LinkedIn is something that is not going to be widely seen by your audience. It's not smart enough yet to understand the difference between me posting an article that's quoting Trump and me saying that, you know, I've got mixed emotions on this potential idea, versus I think Trump is the world, or I think Trump is the anti-world. It's not smart enough to do that yet. It just sees Trump, downregulate at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many things about it. My future brother-in-law works over at LinkedIn.
Okay.
And so there is, on purpose, it actually changes so much, to your point, because you might see some posts that actually take off with controversy, but depending. Funny, Stuart Byrne from JLL just posted, and he had over a couple 100,000 impressions from just taking a picture of a photo of a phone booth at his office. It was hilarious. He's just like, I'm working out of here. And of course, it was just having this photo booth, nothing beyond that, with a couple sentences. I want to get your thoughts on culture.
Okay.
But also the balance of culture and work life, because so many people talk about culture. They talk about families. It seems like there's been a good shift since COVID, but you try to get the workouts in. I work too much. So I'd love to hear your advice for our audience, but also for me. How do you think about that balance of working and putting in the hours, balancing with the family time, especially with you having someone about to graduate and go off to college?
So, actually, just graduated college. I wanted to go out in the workforce. Yeah, okay. I'm actually waiting for a text, literally, as we get this. So it's interesting you asked that, because about 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote an article on this. And I've done a couple talks on this at a conference called Cabo Press. Shout out to my good friend, Chris Lemma. Here's the reality about balance. Balance is only found in the extremes. Meaning that you cannot go from balance of I'm working 8 hours a week, but I'm going to spend this 8 hours with my family. Think about that from a teeter-totter perspective. That's not where you find balance.
Yep.
So balance is in that middle ground. So the way I've personally approached this, balance is only found in the extremes, meaning that if you're going to go all in on work, you also need to go all in on family, or you need to be having the very hard conversations with your family of, we're going to be out of balance for a particular amount of time. Here's what I'm committing to. So, what I would do for my handle on Instagram is Road Warrior Fit. I've got a web page that I haven't touched in forever on that as well. Part of it was like, okay, if I'm going to go in on my health, I need to make sure that I am really prioritizing my workouts on my health on the road. But what I would do on the road, and I still do this, I will be up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I will be working till 11:30, midnight, etc. Because when I go home, I'm turning that off. I am not doing the 5 to 11 in the evenings or those types of things. I am going to make sure that I'm still meeting my obligations. I'm still getting stuff done. But if I'm going to be on the road like I am for this 4-week period, I'm going to make this time as productive as humanly possible, so that I don't feel guilty about not doing that when I am back at home. It's the only way you can truly find balance on these. And I spent a decade on the road doing 120,000 miles a year. That's what my kids grew up knowing. But I was there on the weekends. I was doing the baseball practices. I was one of the instructors for karate that we all got our black belts together, because I wasn't going in upstairs to my office for 4 hours on a Saturday. because I was up until 11, 12 o'clock at night on a Thursday in a hotel in Atlanta. So,
Andrew, it was so great to have you, brother.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you guys for opening the opportunity and really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for flying into Atlanta. Always great to have you here. Can't wait to see you in D.C. Can
And
see
Dallas.
you in Dallas, Chicago,
Yeah,
Vegas.
Well,
New
Vegas
York.
like all year long.
Yeah, Vegas is probably every month now.
I'm about to buy a condo in Vegas. Just to save on
Can't wait to
expenses.
That's what my wife says. You should rent an apartment in Vegas. It's cheaper that way.
Can't wait to get down to Dallas though, because Dallas I think is Dallas and Atlanta seem to be capitals for our industry, for real estate.
Well, and I'm excited for Dallas because of I'm a big proponent of what Retsy is doing, and I'm excited to actually have a Retsy dedicated event and being able to really focus in on that.
Yeah, some incredible leaders, focused on technology, a lot of CTOs and COOs, so it should be a lot of fun. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.